The morning fog clung stubbornly to the pier, curling around the hulls of docked boats and the low-lying warehouses of the Naval Special Warfare Base. Seagulls shrieked overhead, their cries bouncing off concrete walls and the gleaming metal of training obstacles. A chill ran through the early air, enough to make men pull their jackets tighter, but not Alina Ward. She didn't shiver. She never had. Alina stepped from the shadows, her boots silent against the wet asphalt. Her braid swung like a pendulum, precise and unyielding. She looked at the compound in front of her with a soldier's eye, scanning entry points, watch posts, and security cameras, cataloging every detail before she even touched her briefing folder. She was mid-30s, athletic but lean, her presence sharp and precise, an energy that suggested danger wrapped neatly in calm. No one here knew her. The base had received a memo, but the details were vague. Alina Ward, temporary assignment, civilian consultant, program evaluation. A footnote said she had a specialist background in combat recovery, whatever that meant. To the SEALs, it sounded like another bureaucrat with too much authority and too little experience. Whispers started immediately as she entered the mess hall. "That's her," one recruit muttered, eyeing her over his cup of coffee. "She's just some civvy," another said with a smirk, clearly expecting a dull lecture or timid evaluation. "She's gonna slow everything down," a third murmured, his voice tinged with disbelief as he watched her navigate the room, moving with quiet confidence. Admiral Cole Harker watched her from across the room. Every movement was measured, but the calm in her posture made his seasoned gut tighten. He'd seen a lot, decades commanding men, watching them break, bend, and push past human limits, but this woman was an unknown factor. Harker was the kind of man who didn't respect the unknown easily. Yet, something about her drew his attention. Something in the way her eyes scanned, noting every detail, every imperfection, every tactical misstep, even though she wore no uniform, carried no weapon. The SEALs, unaware of the silent evaluation happening across the hall, continued their breakfast rituals, but Harker's gaze lingered. There was a subtle rhythm to her movement, a quiet authority he couldn't place. She didn't speak to anyone immediately, didn't introduce herself. Her eyes occasionally flicked to Harker, a faint challenge shimmering in the intensity. Then it happened, an almost imperceptible gesture. Alina adjusted her shirt slightly, reaching for her jacket. The movement revealed a faint, jagged scar along her ribs. Nothing dramatic, nothing immediately alarming, but enough for Harker to freeze for a heartbeat. A trained officer like him recognized scars, not just as injuries but as stories. And those scars told a story of survival, of something brutal, something that had demanded more from her than most men could endure. The fog of conversation in the mess hall didn't mask the sudden stillness in Harker's chest. She had intentionally, or maybe subconsciously, revealed a piece of herself that spoke volumes. The SEALs had no clue. To them, she was just another civilian here to make life difficult. But Harker's mind started ticking. He had seen battlefield scars before, seen soldiers wear them like badges. But these weren't battlefield scars. Not entirely. The jaggedness, the pattern, it was intentional, methodical, almost surgical. This wasn't the random chaos of combat. This was design. Alina's eyes met his. Calm, unflinching, but holding the weight of experience. She didn't smile. She didn't look nervous. She merely assessed, as if waiting to see how Harker would respond. And for a moment, the Admiral, a man who rarely lost his composure, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity mixed with apprehension. She approached the table where 5 of the SEAL candidates were finishing their breakfast. Without preamble, she spoke, her voice low but firm. "Bring me your 5 strongest." The men froze, exchanging looks. Smirks faded, confidence wavered. Some laughed nervously. "Strongest for what?" one asked, trying to keep the tone casual. "I'm here to test them," Alina said simply, almost mechanically. There was no room for negotiation in her voice, no hint of hesitation. The men turned to Harker, expecting him to intervene, to dismiss her authority, to chuckle at the absurdity. He didn't. Instead, he felt a tension in the air, something that prickled his instincts, the same instincts that had saved his life countless times in hostile environments. He nodded once subtly, signaling them forward. The recruits stepped up, their postures brimming with confidence, unaware of the storm they were about to face. The first man lunged at her. Elena sidestepped with uncanny precision, redirecting his momentum. He stumbled forward, trying to regain his balance. The second attacked in tandem, swinging a punch, only to find himself gently but firmly turned onto the floor. Within minutes, all five were sprawled across the mess hall floor, catching their breath, humiliated. A silence fell over the room. The other SEALs watched in disbelief. No civilian could move like that. No one could anticipate their moves, control their force, and dismantle them without raising a hand. Harker stepped forward, his voice measured but carrying a rare edge. "Where did you learn that?" Elena met his gaze directly, calm, controlled, unfazed. "That's classified," she whispered. Harker's jaw tightened. There was no humor in her answer, no embellishment, just truth wrapped in a lie, truth she couldn't share. He studied her, her scars, her posture, her eyes. Each small detail whispered experience, pain, training beyond standard military programs. And then the thought struck him like a bullet. She isn't just a consultant. She isn't just here for evaluation. She's testing me too. The men on the floor groaned, scrambling to their feet, red-faced and sweating. They muttered apologies, brushed off sand and grit, but Harker didn't see them. He saw her, and a knot tightened in his gut. He had trained men to follow orders, to respect authority. But Elena Ward, she commanded attention without rank, without title, without explanation. Finally, she straightened, gathering her folder. "I'll need a full assessment of their physical and psychological responses within 24 hours, she said, her voice calm. "And Admiral," she paused, letting the title linger in the air. "Don't underestimate them, or yourself." Harker swallowed. He couldn't tell if she was warning him or herself. As she walked toward the exit, the early morning sun broke through the fog, glinting off the wet asphalt. Her shadow stretched long and narrow, and for a moment, Harker could almost imagine her silhouette walking across war-torn cities, hostile sands, places he had only read about in classified briefings. He felt a chill he didn't entirely understand. And then she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of ozone and determination, and the unmistakable impression that nothing on this base would ever be the same again. Harker turned back to the recruits, who were whispering frantically, trying to rationalize what had just happened. But he barely heard them. His eyes remained on the door through which Elena had vanished. "Who is she?" he asked himself silently. "And what has she survived that I can't even imagine?" The answer, he realized, would not come easily. And somewhere in the quiet of the foggy morning, as the base stirred to life, a shadow moved just beyond the tree line, watching the mess hall with keen, calculating eyes. Elena Ward's arrival was only the beginning. The sun was climbing higher, burning away the morning fog, but doing little to lift the tension that had settled over the Coronado training grounds. Elena Ward had already left a mark, both literal and invisible, on the men of SEAL Team 6's incoming candidates. Her name whispered through the barracks like an incantation. Some tried to joke, others avoided eye contact, but all of them knew one unspoken truth. This woman was not like anyone they'd ever faced before. Harker watched her from the observation deck as she walked deliberately toward the outdoor training area, the grinder. Her movements were precise, each step measured, almost surgical. Even without gear, without weapons, she commanded the space, and it seemed as if the ground itself acknowledged her presence. The recruits began following reluctantly, eyes wide, unsure whether to fear or mock her. "Sir," one of the senior instructors muttered, "she's dangerous. I mean, a civilian shouldn't." Harker cut him off, eyes still trained on Elena. "She's not here to play games. Watch." The 5 strongest recruits had been called forward at her command. She didn't offer handshakes, introductions, or warnings. She simply gestured, Form up." The men exchanged glances, confident smirks plastered across their faces. They assumed she would be like the previous consultants, timid, overly cautious, predictable. They were wrong. Alina's first instruction was simple: close quarters combat. No gear, no firearms, just their hands, feet, and reflexes. The recruit stepped forward, thinking brute strength alone could dominate. The first attack came, a powerful right hook aimed at her head. She moved with impossible swiftness, leaning into his momentum, redirecting him off balance. The man stumbled and fell forward, landing hard on the padded mat. A collective gasp erupted from the other trainees. "You okay?" she asked, almost politely, but there was no softness in her tone. He nodded, trying to recover, but she was already turning her attention to the next recruit. This time, he lunged from the side, attempting a leg sweep. Alina anticipated the motion perfectly, spinning around him in a seamless motion that left him exposed to a counterstrike he never saw coming. He fell back, sprawled across the floor. The remaining 3 men hesitated, their confidence visibly shaken. Whispers of disbelief ran through the group. "She's fast, too fast." Harker's jaw tightened. He could feel the energy shift in the air. This wasn't training. This was a test, a brutal, unforgiving evaluation. She moved not with the flair of a street fighter, not with the raw power of a seasoned martial artist, but with the cold efficiency of someone who had been forced to survive against impossible odds. Every strike was calculated, every motion deliberate. She didn't flinch, didn't breathe heavily, didn't sweat. Within minutes, all 5 recruits were on the ground, faces red, chests heaving, mouths agape. They weren't injured, just stunned, defeated, utterly unprepared for what they had just witnessed. The mess hall earlier had been only a taste. This was a demonstration of control, of precision, of dominance. Alina straightened, brushing a strand of hair from her face, her expression unreadable. "Assessment complete. I will need full performance reports, including mental resilience observations, by 1800 hours. Her voice carried authority without asking permission. It wasn't just commanding, it was demanding compliance. The recruits looked to Harker, expecting a reprimand, a dismissal, a laugh at their humiliation. None came. He simply crossed his arms and studied her, silent. "You move like someone who's not just trained," he said quietly, his voice betraying a rare note of curiosity, maybe even respect. "Where did you learn that?" Alina's eyes met his, unwavering. "That's classified," she replied softly. Harker's gut twisted. He'd commanded teams in hostile territories, led operations that had left men broken, yet nothing in his years had prepared him for someone like Alina Ward. She carried herself with the weight of experiences no one else on the base could comprehend. Her scars, barely visible under her tight shirt, hinted at survival in places and situations that defied imagination. He stepped closer, instinctively drawn to study her, yet wary of the stories those scars might tell. "You're not just a civilian, are you?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she began packing, reviewing each recruit like a chess player scanning the board before making her next move. "No," she finally said. "I'm not here to evaluate your soldiers' performance alone. I'm here to evaluate the system." Harker's brow furrowed. The base prided itself on being the pinnacle of training, efficiency, and operational excellence. And what exactly does that mean? Alina paused mid-step, glancing at him with a piercing stare. "It means your training works on the obedient. It works on the willing. But what happens when someone breaks the rules? When someone refuses to follow? When the enemy isn't uniformed, isn't predictable, and doesn't play fair?" Her question hung in the air like smoke. The SEALs nearby shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at the sky as if hoping the answer would come from the clouds, but no one spoke. Harker took a measured breath. "And your point?" "My point," she said slowly, "is that we need to prepare for what the system refuses to acknowledge: human adaptability, extreme resilience, survival when the rules no longer apply." Harker's pulse quickened. He'd heard whispers of black operations, off-grid missions, units that were trained beyond SEAL standards, but they were usually theories, ghost stories, classified nightmares. He had never seen someone move like Alina, with precision born of life-or-death experience no standard training could instill. The recruits, still recovering from their defeat, tried to mask their fear with bravado. One, a tall man named Riggs, stepped forward. "So, what's next, lady? You gonna try to kill us all before breakfast?" Alina didn't flinch, didn't laugh, didn't acknowledge the sarcasm. "No," she said. "I'm going to see how you react under pressure when the predictable fails." The words sent a ripple through the group. They had expected a light test, a morale check, maybe a series of drills. Instead, they got a glimpse into something darker, something real. Harker's instincts screamed at him. This woman had been forged in a world he had only read about in classified dossiers, a world of covert extractions, impossible missions, and survival tactics beyond human endurance. His admiration was tinged with unease. He didn't know whether to trust her or fear her. Perhaps both. Then she did something unexpected. She turned to him, slowly lifting the hem of her shirt again, this time deliberately, revealing a scar that ran diagonally across her ribcage. It was jagged, raised, a map of pain and survival etched into her body. Harker froze. He had seen many battle injuries, but these weren't battlefield scars. Not exactly. They were precise, almost ritualistic, hints of something methodical, deliberate. "Who are you?" Harker asked, his voice low, barely audible over the faint breeze sweeping across the base. Alina met his gaze steadily. "Someone who survived," she said softly. "Someone who refuses to forget." The weight of her words lingered in the air. The recruits, oblivious to the significance, were already muttering about being defeated again. But Harker felt it in his bones. The arrival of Alina Ward wasn't just a disruption to their training. It was a warning. A storm was coming, and she was the eye of it. As she collected her folder and strode away toward the barracks, Harker stayed frozen for a moment, watching her shadow stretch long in the morning sun. The unease in his gut deepened. This was no ordinary consultant. She carried secrets, skills, and scars that demanded respect and fear. Behind her, somewhere in the shadows near the perimeter, a figure watched silently, waiting, calculating. The wind carried no sound of movement, but the faintest shift hinted at someone who had known Alina once, someone who would recognize the marks she bore. Harker's jaw tightened. His eyes followed her until she disappeared into the foggy light of the early day. Who is she? He asked himself again. And what has she survived that I cannot even imagine? The answer, he realized, would not come easily, and it might be more dangerous than anyone on the base could anticipate. Evening descended over Coronado like a velvet curtain, turning the ocean into a mirror of molten silver under the sinking sun. Inside the Admiral's office, the low hum of air conditioning and the distant thrum of helicopters landing on the base created a strange serenity, a calm before a storm that Harker already sensed but couldn't yet define. Alina Ward sat across from him, her posture straight, legs crossed at the ankle, hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked like a student taking notes, but the glint in her eyes betrayed anything but passivity. To Harker, it was impossible to gauge her emotions, impossible to tell what lay beneath the calm exterior. Every fiber of her body screamed discipline. Every scar hinted at battles fought and survived. Every silent pause suggested memory-laden secrets she wasn't ready to speak aloud. Harker leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Alina," he began, measured, careful, "I need straight answers. Where did you learn to move like that? The recruits, you reduced them to nothing in minutes. That's not civilian training. That's beyond SEAL standards." She tilted her head, her braids swinging slightly. "You asked me that before," she said softly, almost conversationally, "and I told you it's classified." Harker exhaled, but the knot in his stomach didn't loosen. He had trained men to follow orders, to obey, to respect authority. But Alina wasn't simply breaking rules. She didn't recognize them. She didn't just operate outside protocol. She had no visible allegiance, no rank, no official history. And yet, every movement, every glance, every silent decision was calibrated like a weapon. "You're not a civilian," he pressed. His voice carried the weight of authority but also something sharper, curiosity edged with suspicion. She didn't flinch. "No," she said simply. "Then what are you?" His tone demanded more than words. It demanded the truth, even if it had to be partial, even if it was dangerous. Alina's eyes flickered, almost imperceptibly. She folded her hands in her lap. "I'm here to test the system," she said, calm but with a weight that made the words land heavier than any slap. Harker frowned. "The system, you mean our training protocols?" She shook her head slowly. "No, I mean the human system, the limits of what soldiers are willing to endure when everything breaks down, when obedience fails, when loyalty is tested in ways your manuals can't predict. That's what I'm evaluating." Her words hit Harker with the force of a storm wave. The SEALs were trained to fight, to survive, to adapt. But Alina's phrasing suggested something far more dangerous. She wasn't just evaluating. They were being measured against a standard designed to push beyond humanity. And she knew it because she had lived it. He studied her scars, subtle, almost hidden beneath her shirt, but visible enough to tell a story of endurance and pain. Linear cuts along her ribs, faint puckering from healed burns, small punctures that hinted at restraints and extreme stress. These weren't battlefield injuries. Not completely. They were scars etched with intent, deliberate and precise, remnants of experiences that had demanded something extraordinary from her body and mind. Harker leaned forward. "Who did this to you?" Alina's eyes darkened, flicking momentarily away. "Those who trained me," she said quietly, almost regretfully. "Those who broke me." A shiver ran down Harker's spine. She wasn't speaking metaphorically. These were truths carved into her flesh, and he had seen enough combat to recognize the pain behind her words. "You weren't a civilian," he said, voice low. "You were something else. Some off-the-books program, black ops, beyond SEAL level." Alina's lips tightened. "Not just beyond SEAL, beyond what anyone should endure." She paused. Her gaze dropped to the floor for a heartbeat, then back to him. "We were ghosts, unacknowledged, non-existent. Our missions, they didn't exist on paper. Our lives were expendable, and when we survived, we weren't rescued. We were abandoned." Harker's jaw tightened. He had heard whispers of such programs, shadows lurking in classified files, rumors dismissed as myth or conspiracy. And yet, here she was, proof that the shadows had teeth. "I didn't come here just to observe your recruits," Alina continued. "I came here because someone is after me." Harker's pulse quickened. "Who?" She shook her head. "I can't say, not yet, but they have resources, reach, and they won't hesitate. If I'm here, they'll come." The weight of her words settled in the room like fog. Harker leaned back, running a hand down his face. He had prepared for everything in his decades of command, but he had not prepared for this. A woman who had survived hell, who moved with the precision of a weapon, and whose past was a minefield with no map. "You're telling me you're a threat to no one on this base," he said cautiously, "and yet you carry the experience and skills to dismantle every one of my recruits in minutes. And now, someone is hunting you." Alina nodded slightly, her expression unreadable. "They didn't just want me dead," she said softly. "They wanted me erased. Memories, identity, history, all gone. I escaped, barely." Harker felt his chest tighten. The notion of a trained operative, surviving untraceable attacks, with enemies he couldn't even identify, unsettled him in ways few things ever had. He realized then that Alina Ward was not just evaluating his recruits. She was evaluating him, testing whether he was capable of responding to an unpredictable, uncontainable threat. He stood abruptly, packing the room. "If what you're saying is true, this could compromise the entire base. You understand that?" Alina's gaze followed him calmly. "I'm aware, which is why I'm here before they arrive. I need to prepare you, even if you don't yet know what you're preparing for." Harker's mind raced. He had decades of operational experience, had survived ambushes, betrayals, and impossible odds. But this woman's history, her presence, it threatened to upend everything he thought he knew about warfare, loyalty, and survival. Finally, he stopped packing and faced her. "You're going to have to prove it," he said, voice steady, though his stomach churned with apprehension. "Not just your skills, but your judgment, your intent. I need to know I can trust you." Alina tilted her head slightly, as if considering the proposition. Then she reached into her jacket and retrieved a small, nondescript notebook. She placed it on the desk in front of him, opening it to pages filled with notes, diagrams, and observations, each meticulous, each strategic, each a window into a mind trained for war and survival. "This is not just assessment," she said. "This is evidence of capability, of the threats I anticipate, of the measures necessary to survive them. You'll see how my training differs from yours." Harker studied the notebook carefully, recognizing terminology and methods that should not exist outside of the most classified military programs. Each page suggested knowledge of tactics, physiology, and psychology that far surpassed even top-tier SEAL training. "You've been through this before," he said finally, voice quiet, almost reverent. Alina nodded. "More than once, and I didn't come back the same each time. Some of us, we don't get a second chance. That's why I'm here, to make sure others do." The room was silent for a long moment. Harker's mind reeled with questions, but one thought crystallized above the rest. This woman was not simply a consultant, not merely a survivor. She was a force of nature, scarred, dangerous, and determined. And the presence of such a force on his base meant that the quiet routines of Coronado were about to be shattered. Before he could respond, Alina stood. Her movements were fluid, precise. She placed the notebook back in her jacket. "Tomorrow we begin with operational stress tests. You will see what I mean by adaptability." And Admiral, her eyes locked with his, steel and fire flickering in their depths. "Be ready. You might not like what you discover about your own men or yourself." Harker swallowed hard. Her words carried the weight of prophecy. As she walked toward the door, the faintest shift of motion caught his attention, a shadow moving beyond the window blinds. Someone was watching, waiting. Harker's pulse spiked. "Alina," he called. She paused briefly at the threshold, not turning fully. "They're already here," she said quietly. And with that, she disappeared into the fading light, leaving Harker alone with the weight of her words, the scars she carried, and the gnawing certainty that nothing on his base would ever be the same again. Somewhere in the dimming twilight beyond the fences, someone was indeed watching, calculating, waiting. And Harker realized with a cold, sinking certainty, the real test had only just begun. The moon hung low over Coronado, casting the training grounds in a silvery, spectral light. Shadows stretched across the grinder like fingers, clawing at the sand-strewn earth. Inside the barracks, the SEALs slept fitfully, unaware that the calm they assumed belonged to night was only an illusion. Alina Ward moved across the sand barefoot, her steps silent, precise. The cold bit at her skin, but she barely registered it. Her focus was elsewhere. Every obstacle, every rope, every log she passed seemed to whisper memories she had tried to bury. The grinder, the place of physical exertion and mental discipline, had been a stage for nightmares she had lived through years ago, and tonight she was retracing the paths of her past. Admiral Harker, watching from the observation window of his office, felt an unusual unease. He had commanded teams in hostile environments, survived ambushes and near-fatal encounters, yet the sight of Alina moving like a predator in the moonlight unsettled him more than anything he'd encountered in his career. Her calm, her precision, the fluidity of her motions, it was all too deliberate, too practiced. She stopped in the center of the field. The moonlight illuminated her form perfectly, casting her shadow long and menacing. Slowly, she lifted the hem of her shirt. Harker's breath caught. Jagged scars traced across her ribs, deep and irregular. Some were linear, clean and precise as if made by blades. Others were pockmarked as though scorched by fire or punctured by metal restraints. But the patterns suggested something darker. These weren't random battlefield injuries. These were ritualistic, methodical, designed to leave marks, both physical and psychological. Harker's instincts screamed at him. He had seen wounds that told stories, but these were chapters of survival no one should endure and live to tell. Before he could call out, Elena moved with fluid precision, turning slowly to face him. The moonlight caught her eyes, dark, piercing, and full of memory. "They thought they could erase me," she whispered. Her voice carried across the sand, clear and calm, but underneath was a tremor of rage and pain. "They tried to strip my identity, my purpose, my history, but I survived. I always survive." Harker stepped out onto the sand, boots crunching on the cold grains. "Elena," he called, keeping his voice measured, "who did this to you?" She didn't flinch, didn't look away. "The ones who trained me, the ones who made me into a weapon, those who saw humanity as a weakness." Harker's stomach twisted. He had commanded soldiers through war zones, witnessed carnage beyond imagination, yet hearing her speak so calmly about what sounded like torture sent a shiver down his spine. "You weren't a civilian," he said cautiously. "You were part of some classified program." Elena's jaw tightened, and for a moment her eyes flickered with something Harker had not seen before, the shadow of memory so sharp it made her entire posture rigid. "Not just a program," she said softly. "An experiment, a test. They broke us so thoroughly that surviving was the only rebellion we could claim." Harker's mind raced. Off-the-books black ops programs, unacknowledged units, soldiers trained to survive impossible odds. He had read the classified reports. He had dismissed them as bureaucratic exaggerations. But here she was, a living testament to every nightmare he had ever been warned about but hoped never existed. She stepped closer, the moonlight tracing every scar, every ridge in her muscles honed by training beyond human standards. "They didn't just want to kill us," she said. "They wanted to erase us, our identities, our memories, our existence." Harker's pulse quickened. "And you escaped." She nodded, barely, "and now they are coming again to finish what they started." The wind shifted suddenly, cold and sharp, and Harker's instincts screamed. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the fence line there was movement, subtle, calculated. Someone was watching, calculating, waiting. "Elena," he said cautiously, "if they come here, if they attack the base, how many can you handle on your own?" She tilted her head, almost smiling faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I don't intend to fight alone," she said. "I intend to make sure they don't need to." Harker frowned. "What do you mean?" "They want information," she said quietly. "Not just about me, but about the men here, the programs, the operations they can exploit. If I let them extract it," she paused, voice dropping to a whisper, "they'll destroy more than me." Harker's stomach sank. The implication was clear. The SEALs, trained to survive anything, could be walking into a trap even he might not anticipate, and all because of Elena's past. She looked at him, her eyes unwavering. "You'll need to trust me," she said. "Even if you don't like it, even if it scares you, if they come, hesitation will get people killed." Harker swallowed, his throat dry. Trust. In his world, trust was earned over years, through fire and shared danger. And yet the evidence of her skill, the certainty in her voice, the raw truth in her scars, he felt it instinctively. He had no choice but to trust her, at least for now. Suddenly, a faint clicking sound came from the edge of the field. Harker's eyes snapped to the perimeter. A figure moved between the shadows, deliberate, silent. His hand went to his sidearm, but Elena placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "They're testing the response," she whispered. "They want to see how you react. Don't give them that satisfaction." The figure stepped closer into the moonlight. A man, tall, athletic, with a posture that suggested lethal intent. Harker felt a chill. Something about him seemed familiar, almost too familiar. Alina's gaze hardened. "They've changed," she said quietly. "We trained together once. They survived the same hell I did." Harker's pulse jumped. "Who?" She exhaled slowly, almost silently. "My former team." The words landed like a blow. Harker's mind raced. Ghost units, off-the-books operatives, trained beyond morality, beyond law. And now they were here on his base under the cover of night. A wind gusted across the field, lifting sand into swirling patterns. Harker squinted through the moonlight. The man at the edge of the grinder didn't move erratically. Every step, every glance, every pause was deliberate. He was not just trained. He was methodical, precise, unrelenting. "Alina," Harker said quietly, "what are you going to do?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked toward the center of the field, standing in full view. The moonlight illuminated her scars, her hardened muscles, her calm fury. "I'm ending this," she said simply. The figure stepped closer, and Harker realized with a cold clarity that this wasn't just a threat. It was personal. "Alina," a voice called from the shadows. Her body tensed. She knew that voice. It was a sound from a past she had tried to bury, a memory she had survived but never forgotten. The night hung heavy with anticipation, the moonlight painting the grinder silver, the shadows dark and waiting. Harker's instincts screamed at him. This was more than a test. This was the collision of past and present, a reckoning that no training manual could prepare anyone for. And Alina's gaze, fixed on the approaching figure, betrayed nothing, yet carried everything. For the first time, Harker understood the truth of her scars. They weren't just wounds. They were a story, a warning, a promise. And now that story was about to explode in ways no one could have predicted. The night was eerily silent, broken only by the soft crunch of sand beneath boots and the distant hum of waves against the pier. The moon cast pale light across the grinder, turning the shadows long and distorted. Every shadow felt alive, every ripple of movement a possible threat. Admiral Harker's gut tightened as he realized the reality. Alina Ward's past was here, and it had come for her. From the darkness, three figures emerged. Their movements were fluid, precise, soldiers who didn't just train for combat but for survival, evasion, and elimination. Harker's instincts screamed that these were not recruits. Not even SEAL veterans could move with this kind of quiet, controlled lethality. Alina stepped forward, her posture calm, almost casual, but her eyes were sharp, scanning, measuring. Each scar along her ribs, now fully visible in the moonlight, seemed to tell a story of endurance, a history of battles too dark for ordinary men to imagine. "You shouldn't have come here," she said softly, voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. One of the figures, tall and lean, stepped forward. "We were sent," he said, voice low, controlled. "They said you needed to disappear." Harker's pulse quickened. Disappeared. He recognized the language, clean, clinical, the kind of orders given in operations that left no survivors. Alina's eyes narrowed. "You were part of it," she said quietly, almost accusingly. "You trained me. You knew what I would endure, and now you're here to finish the work." The three exchanged glances. One laughed softly, a sound that carried no warmth. "You survived. We survived. But surviving doesn't mean you get to decide what happens next." Harker stepped forward instinctively, hand hovering near his sidearm. "Stand down," he commanded, though uncertainty laced his tone. He didn't know these men. He didn't know what Alina was capable of in full combat mode. And he certainly didn't know the full extent of their training or their mission. The tallest operative shifted, moving silently across the sand, his gaze never leaving Alina. Harker's mind raced. If they engaged now, casualties were inevitable, but hesitation might be just as deadly. Alina didn't flinch. Instead, she took a single step forward, and in that moment, something remarkable happened. She moved not with brute force, not with panic, but with absolute clarity. Her stance was balanced, every muscle ready, her focus razor-sharp. The first operative lunged. A strike meant to incapacitate, precise, fast, but Alina Ward was faster. She pivoted, redirecting his momentum, and he hit the sand with a grunt. Not painfully but decisively, enough to send a warning. The second operative attacked from the side, swinging a low sweep meant to take her legs. Alina jumped, twisting midair, landing perfectly behind him, her elbow catching him in the spine with a controlled but devastating impact. He staggered but didn't fall. The third operative circled, waiting for an opening, watching every micro-expression. Harker saw the recognition in her eyes, the silent acknowledgement that these were not ordinary men. These were ghosts of her past, trained to break her, and now tasked to finish the mission. "Admiral," she said quietly, "watch closely. They're testing not just me, they're testing the base, the system, everyone inside it." Harker's jaw tightened. He realized then that her warning wasn't just metaphorical. Every move she made was a demonstration, a calculation, an evaluation of responses under pressure. She wasn't just fighting, they were all being tested. The fight escalated, silent, fluid, almost balletic in its execution. Alina moved with a rhythm honed by years of survival against impossible odds. She was a blur, every strike precise, every dodge perfectly timed. But Harker noticed something else. She wasn't just defending herself. She was controlling the engagement, dictating its pace, ensuring no one, including the operatives, was killed outright. "Why not end them?" Harker asked quietly, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Because that's not my fight," she said, voice low. "Not yet. Survival isn't about victory. It's about control, precision, timing. They'll learn that soon enough." The tallest operative, recovering, lunged again, faster this time. Alina caught his wrist mid-strike, twisted it, and sent him crashing into the sand. The second operative attempted a flank maneuver, only to find himself tripped and held down by a leg sweep combined with a controlled elbow to his back. Harker watched, fascinated and terrified. The operatives were elite, no doubt trained in off-grid, unacknowledged programs. And yet, Alina Ward moved through them like water cutting stone. Every scar on her body was proof of training beyond comprehension. Every motion suggested a life lived on the edge of survival. Then the first operative recovered, eyes blazing with recognition and fury. "You've changed," he hissed, pushing off the ground. "You're different." Alina's eyes narrowed. "So are you," she replied, voice sharp. "And different doesn't mean better, it means surviving when others fail." Harker felt the tension spike. He had seen combat before, true combat, but nothing like this. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't desperation. This was calculated, controlled, and terrifyingly precise, a dance of death practiced under unimaginable conditions. Suddenly, Alina shifted her stance, her movements flowing like water, her gaze locking on the tallest operative. In a single fluid motion, she used his momentum against him, twisting, leveraging, and sending him sprawling into the sand. He landed with a grunt, and for the first time, Harker saw a flicker of uncertainty in the faces of the operatives. The other two paused, reassessing. And in that pause, Alina made her move, not a strike to kill, but a precise takedown that demonstrated dominance, skill, and control. They were on the defensive now, circling cautiously, calculating, realizing they had underestimated the woman before them. Harker's breath caught. The fight wasn't just physical. It was psychological, strategic, and intensely personal. Alina Ward was not just surviving. She was teaching, proving, commanding. Finally, the three operatives stopped, breathing heavily, faces hard but eyes wary. Alina stepped forward, calm, poised, her scars illuminated in the moonlight, a map of survival and defiance. "You came here to finish what you started," she said quietly, voice steady. "And now you see why that's impossible. I am not the same person you trained to break. I survived, I remember, and I will not be erased." The operatives exchanged glances, then backed away slowly, shadows merging with the darkness beyond the grinder. Harker exhaled, feeling both relief and dread. Relief that Alina had survived, dread that her past, and those who sought to finish it, would not give up so easily. "Alina," he said, finally stepping forward, "who were they?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the sand, at the shadows, at the darkness beyond the fence line. Then she looked up at him, eyes blazing. "They were my team," she said quietly, almost mournfully. "The people I trusted with my life. The people who helped break me, and now they're back. Not for loyalty, not for justice, but for control. And they'll keep coming until someone stops them, me or anyone else who stands in the way." Harker swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking into him. Coronado was no longer just a training base. It was a battlefield, the quiet calm of night shattered by ghosts of Alina Ward's past. And as the operatives vanished into the darkness, Harker realized one terrifying truth. The fight had only just begun. The next morning, Coronado was deceptively calm. Sunlight gleamed off the steel hulls of docked ships, gulls cried overhead, and the base thrummed with the mundane rhythm of drills and maintenance. But beneath the routine, tension hung like static electricity. Admiral Harker knew Alina Ward's past would not rest. Her warnings were real, and he had no illusion that her former operatives would simply retreat. Alina moved through the base with the same calm precision she had shown in the moonlit grinder. Her boots struck the pavement softly, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, every subtle shift of movement. Each step carried a purpose, each glance a warning. She had been hunted before, survived impossible odds, and she knew instinctively when danger lingered nearby. Harker caught up to her near the training compound. "We can't just wait for them to come to us," he said, his voice taut with urgency. "If they want something from the base, we have to anticipate it." She nodded, pulling a small tablet from her jacket. Diagrams, schematics, and notes scrolled across the screen. "They're systematic," she said. "They won't attack randomly. They'll probe first, test the boundaries, find weaknesses. That's how they always operate." Harker frowned. "And how do you know that?" She looked at him, her eyes hard but calm. "Because I trained them." The words hit harder than a physical blow. He had expected skill, precision, determination, but not this level of intimacy with the threat. These weren't faceless enemies. They were ghosts of her past, trained under her guidance, pushed beyond human limits by her experience. And now they had come full circle. Before he could respond, the first alarm sounded, a low, mechanical beep from the base security system. Harker's hand went to his holster instinctively, but Alina was already moving, swift, precise, every step intentional. "Stay behind me," she said quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a command meant to be obeyed without question. The alarms echoed through the corridors as security footage confirmed the worst. 3 unauthorized figures had breached the outer perimeter. They weren't moving randomly. They were methodical, calculated, moving with the precision of soldiers who had fought and survived the impossible. Harker watched as Alina assessed the situation. She didn't panic. She didn't hesitate. Every scar along her ribs seemed to pulse with memory, each one a silent testament to battles fought and survived. "They're testing us again," she murmured. "To see what I will do, to see how you respond, to see if anyone can anticipate their moves." The first operative emerged from the shadows near the dock, stepping into the sunlight glinting off wet metal. Harker recognized the same controlled movements he had seen the night before, the same precision, the same lethal awareness. Alina's eyes narrowed. "You've changed," the operative said, voice low, controlled. "We trained you, we broke you. Now you're hunting ghosts that don't exist." Alina's gaze didn't waver. "I survived. That's why I'm still here," she replied. Her tone was calm, almost conversational, but Harker could feel the lethal promise beneath each word. "And now it's your turn to see what survival really means." Without warning, the fight erupted. Alina moved first, her body a blur of precise strikes and fluid movement. She didn't rely on brute force. She relied on control, leverage, anticipation. The first operative lunged, but she twisted seamlessly, redirecting his momentum and sending him sprawling into the metal railing with a sharp clang. Harker, standing behind cover, observed in awe and fear. These were not ordinary men. Their attacks were deliberate, honed over years of survival training. But Alina Ward was something else entirely, a force honed by scars, pain, and a past that had taught her to survive when others would die. The second operative circled, attempting a high sweep aimed at her legs. Alina jumped, twisting in midair, landing behind him, catching his wrist in a precise grip and sending him sprawling into the sand. The third operative, anticipating her moves, adjusted quickly, but she was already moving, flowing from one target to the next with near-supernatural coordination. Harker's pulse raced. He had commanded elite soldiers, survived ambushes, and faced threats that had shattered lesser men. But nothing had prepared him for this. A woman who had endured unspeakable horrors, moved like liquid death, and held herself with the calm authority of someone who had survived every impossible test the world could throw at her. The fight became a deadly ballet across the compound. Alina's movements were calculated, almost artistic, each strike precise, each dodge perfectly timed. She wasn't trying to kill. She was asserting control, proving dominance, teaching survival without lethal consequence. Yet Harker noticed something else. She was drawing on every scar, every memory, every fragment of past trauma as a weapon. Each scar was a lesson, each injury a tool. Her body carried history, and she used it to anticipate, react, and dominate. The operatives paused, circling cautiously, their confidence shaken. Alina's gaze swept over them, calm, unwavering, her posture radiating both authority and danger. "You came to finish what you started," she said softly, almost mournfully. "And now you see why that's impossible. I am not the same person you trained to break. I survived, I remember, and I will not be erased." The tallest operative stepped forward, voice low, almost a whisper. "You're not the only one who remembers." Alina's eyes flickered, recognition flashing for a heartbeat. Harker noticed the subtle change in her stance, a shadow of vulnerability that only lasted a moment before she regained her calm. "Then remember this," she said, her voice carrying across the compound. "I survived before, I will survive again, and anyone who comes for me will learn that the hard way." For a long, tense moment, neither side moved. The operatives assessed, recalculated, and finally began to withdraw, slipping back into the shadows from which they had emerged. Harker felt his body relax slightly, though the tension remained. Alina turned to him, her expression calm but her eyes burning with quiet intensity. "This is only the beginning," she said. "They'll be back, stronger, smarter, and next time they may not be so merciful." Harker exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her words. Coronado was no longer just a training base. It was a battleground, the quiet calm of the morning shattered by ghosts of Alina Ward's past. And as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the compound, Harker realized one terrifying truth. Alina's survival was a weapon, but it was also a warning. The storm that had followed her here was only beginning. Somewhere hidden beyond the fences, the operatives regrouped, communicating silently, calculating their next move. The trap had been set. And Coronado, unwittingly, had become the stage for a battle that no training manual could prepare anyone for. Night had returned to Coronado, heavier and darker than before, as if the moon itself was wary of what was about to unfold. The base, normally a well-oiled machine of drills and discipline, hummed with a tension that Harker had never experienced. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the chill of the ocean wind, in the subtle shift of shadows, in the way even the most experienced SEALs moved with a caution bordering on fear. Alina Ward paced silently near the eastern perimeter, eyes scanning the dark horizon. Every movement of hers carried the same lethal precision that had defined her past encounters with her former operatives. Her ribs, still lined with scars from training that had been both torture and crucible, flexed with muscle memory honed to a razor edge. She wasn't just preparing for an attack, she was anticipating it, predicting it, living it before it happened. Harker approached quietly, careful not to disturb her rhythm. "They've been probing the base all day," he said, voice low. "And I have a bad feeling, Alina. They're not just testing you anymore, they're testing us. They know what's here, they know the layout." And he hesitated, swallowing hard. "Someone here is helping them." Alina froze for a fraction of a second, the first sign of unease he had ever seen in her. Then her posture straightened, her gaze hardening. "A mole," she whispered. "Among us. Someone with knowledge of the base, of the operations, of the men." Harker's stomach churned. Betrayal inside a military installation was one thing, but someone betraying a SEAL base, under the guidance of an off-the-books operative like Alina, that was catastrophic. "How do we find them?" he asked, tension creeping into his voice. Her eyes swept the perimeter. "We can't. Not yet, but we can set the trap, make them believe we are unaware, feed the shadows, wait for the mole to make a move." Harker's pulse raced. "And if we're wrong?" Alina didn't answer immediately. She moved closer to the fence line, flexing her fingers, her scars illuminated faintly by the moonlight. "Then we survive," she said, voice low, resolute. "Because survival isn't a game. It's the only choice we ever had." Harker realized, once again, that every word she spoke carried the weight of history, the unspoken horror and resilience of someone who had lived when death had been an expectation. He studied her scars again, tracing the paths of pain and survival etched into her body, each one a testament to endurance beyond comprehension. Hours passed in tense silence. The SEALs were aware something was wrong, though none could articulate the fear that clung to the night like a second skin. Alina moved among them, observing, instructing subtly, preparing contingencies, each step deliberate, each glance a calculated measure. Then the first signal came, a comms alert from deep within the armory. Unexplained access logs, doors that should have remained closed, opened without authorization. Harker's gut tightened as he traced the entries. Every indication pointed to someone internal, someone trained, someone who had knowledge of the base far beyond ordinary limits. Alina's eyes narrowed. "They've found their ally," she murmured, "and he or she doesn't realize what they've signed up for." Harker followed her gaze toward the armory. Who could it be? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved silently, a shadow among shadows, analyzing the scene, predicting outcomes before they happened. Then she stopped abruptly at the door of the logistics office, where one of the senior lieutenants was working late. Harker's heart sank. "Alina," he began, voice trembling slightly. Her eyes locked on him, steel and fire flickering in their depths. "It's him," she said quietly. "Lieutenant Sanderson, trusted, decorated, respected, but he's feeding them, helping them probe the base, and he doesn't understand who he's dealing with." Harker's stomach dropped. Sanderson had been with the SEALs for over a decade, a man known for loyalty, discipline, and honor. The idea that he could be the mole felt like a betrayal deep enough to shake the foundation of the base. Alina's posture shifted. She moved closer, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to believe it either, but the patterns, the movements, he's giving them everything." Harker's mind raced. "We confront him." Alina shook her head. "Not yet. If we confront him now, he'll disappear, take what he knows, and the threat becomes unstoppable. We wait, we observe, and then we act with precision, deadly precision." Hours passed in tension-filled silence. Sanderson moved through the base with all the authority of his rank, oblivious to the fact that Alina Ward was watching his every motion, anticipating every choice. Harker felt a mix of admiration and fear. The woman he had once merely observed was now the line between survival and catastrophe for everyone on the base. Finally, the moment came. Sanderson moved toward the perimeter, communicating silently via an encrypted channel. Alina signaled Harker to remain behind cover. "Watch and learn," she whispered. With a fluidity that seemed almost impossible, Alina shadowed Sanderson from a distance, predicting his every step. Her movement was silent, precise, controlled, like a predator stalking its prey. She didn't strike yet. She didn't need to. She only needed to guide events to ensure that when the moment came, it would be decisive. Sanderson approached a supply depot near the northern fence. He was reaching for an access panel when Alina struck, quick and silent. In one motion, she had him pinned to the ground, her knee against his chest, a hand across his throat, not to kill but to immobilize. "Lieutenant Sanderson," she said quietly, voice calm, measured, "you've made a serious mistake." He struggled briefly, eyes wide with shock and fear. You can't." Alina's gaze was unyielding. "I already know everything, and now so will the Admiral." Harker stepped forward cautiously. "Explain," he demanded. Alina released Sanderson's throat but kept him pinned with an iron grip. "He's the mole," she said, "providing intel to my former operatives. Every detail, every weakness, every protocol, he's feeding them. And if we hadn't intercepted him tonight, they would have struck at dawn." Sanderson's face paled. I didn't." "You chose to betray your team," Alina interrupted, voice sharp. "You chose to align with killers trained to erase me. You may have justified it to yourself, but survival doesn't excuse betrayal." Harker felt the weight of the moment. The calm, ordered structure of the SEAL base had been shattered, replaced by the harsh reality of espionage, betrayal, and the lethal shadows of Alina Ward's past. "Admiral," Alina said, finally looking at him, "this is the line. We hold it or everything falls. And he doesn't get a say anymore." Harker nodded slowly, swallowing the anger and disbelief. "Secure him," he said. "And Alina, thank you. You saved lives tonight." Her eyes flickered briefly with emotion, relief, exhaustion, and something deeper, a shadow of memory that Harker could not comprehend. "This isn't over," she said softly. "They'll be back, and next time I won't just be protecting you. I'll be protecting the base, the men, the mission, everything, and I won't fail." Sanderson was escorted under strict supervision, muttering in disbelief. Harker watched him go, knowing the betrayal cut deeper than any wound. And as he turned to Alina, the first rays of dawn streaking the sky with blood-red light, he realized the truth. Survival wasn't just about strength. It was about trust, skill, and knowing when to strike. Alina Ward had survived before, yes, but she had also endured betrayal, horror, and unimaginable trials. And now, with the base safe for the moment, she prepared herself for the coming storm. Because the operatives wouldn't stop, and Coronado was about to become the battleground for a war rooted in shadows, scars, and vengeance. Harker watched her, understanding at last that Alina wasn't just a warrior. She was the line between life and death for everyone under his command, and she carried a past that refused to stay buried. The night faded completely into dawn, and in the shadows beyond the perimeter, Harker knew the former operatives were regrouping, patient, calculating, waiting. Alina flexed her hands, scars catching the first light. She whispered to herself almost inaudibly, "I survived before, and I will survive again." The war was far from over. Night had fallen again over Coronado, but this time it carried a weight unlike any other. The base, normally humming with order and discipline, now pulsed with tension, a living, breathing warning of the storm about to strike. Every shadow seemed to move, every gust of wind whispered danger. Admiral Harker's instincts screamed. This was it. Alina Ward moved like a specter through the perimeter, her eyes sharp, calculating every flicker of movement, every sound. Her scars, illuminated faintly by the moonlight, were not just marks of survival. They were instruments of memory, reminders of battles fought and endured. Each one told her where to strike, when to dodge, how to anticipate her enemies before they made a move. Harker followed closely, tense but trusting. He had witnessed her skill, her precision, her calm under pressure. But tonight, he understood the depth of her power. The operatives would not be probing or testing this time. They were coming to destroy, to erase, to finish what they had begun. From the shadows, the three operatives emerged, silent, controlled, and deadly. Their eyes locked on Alina with recognition, fear, and suppressed rage. These were her former team members, the same who had trained her, broken her, and now returned to challenge her for the last time. "You shouldn't have survived," the tallest operative hissed, stepping forward, muscles coiled like spring traps. Alina's gaze didn't waver. "I did survive," she said quietly, "and tonight you learn why that's impossible to undo." Harker's pulse raced. Every step, every movement from both sides felt loaded with imminent danger. He noticed subtle shifts: Alina's breathing, the flex of her scarred ribs, the precision in the placement of her feet. She was preparing to fight not just to survive, but to dominate. The first operative lunged, a blur of motion, but Alina was faster. Her body twisted and flowed, redirecting his momentum, using his own strength against him. He hit the ground with a grunt, more stunned than injured, but the warning was clear. The second operative swung a heavy strike aimed at her side. Alina ducked, spinning gracefully, landing behind him. Her elbow drove into his spine, forcing him to collapse, and she held him there with calculated pressure, enough to disable, not kill. The third operative circled, looking for an opening. Alina's eyes met his. Time seemed to slow. Every scar, every memory, every hour of brutal training sharpened her instincts. She moved like water, flowing from one threat to the next, her attacks measured, precise, and deadly in intent. Harker watched, awe and fear colliding. These men were elite, trained beyond the bounds of ordinary SEALs. But Alina Ward, she was beyond even them. Her body, scarred and honed by unimaginable trials, was a weapon that could anticipate pain, dodge attacks, and strike with lethal accuracy without hesitation. The operatives attempted a coordinated strike, each attacking from different angles. Alina spun, pivoted, and countered with the precision of a seasoned predator. One operative crashed into the metal railing, another tripped over the sand-strewn ground, and the third was momentarily frozen as Alina's gaze locked on him, unblinking, calculating. "You've changed," the third operative hissed. "We trained you, broke you, and now you've become a weapon against us." Alina's voice was soft, deadly calm. "I survived because I had to, and survival teaches things you'll never understand. Tonight, you learn what it truly means to face the consequences of your choices." Harker could feel the tension coil tighter than a spring. Each second was a heartbeat of life or death. Then the operatives shifted, moving in unison, tactical, synchronized, a final attempt to overwhelm her. But Alina was already 2 steps ahead. She anticipated every movement, using leverage, momentum, and precise strikes to disable them without fatal force. Her movements were fluid, almost artistic, yet lethal in purpose. Each scar along her ribs flexed and guided her body with instinctual memory. Pain transformed into strength, trauma transformed into power. The operatives staggered back, recognizing for the first time that they had underestimated her. Alina's gaze swept over them, calm and commanding. "It ends tonight," she said quietly. "You have one chance to leave." They didn't take it. The tallest operative charged with reckless fury. Alina sidestepped, using his momentum to hurl him into the sand with controlled force. The second operative attempted a flank maneuver but found himself ensnared in her calculated grip, his movements restricted, energy dissipated. The third froze, eyes wide, realizing the battle had turned decisively. Harker stepped forward, weapon ready, but Alina raised a hand. "No, not yet. I finished this my way." Time stretched. The operatives, elite and ruthless, were finally at her mercy. She didn't strike to kill. Her purpose wasn't vengeance tonight. It was survival, precision, and assertion of control. She had endured hell. She had survived betrayal. She had learned lessons that no one else could comprehend. And now the balance of power had shifted. "You trained me," she said to them quietly, every word carrying the weight of history and pain. "You broke me. You tried to erase me, But here I am, whole, scarred, strong, and I will not be erased again. The operatives hesitated, uncertainty flashing across their faces. They had underestimated the woman they had once considered subordinate, broken, expendable. Alina Ward had transformed, pain and scars into power, fear into precision. Finally, one operative dropped to his knees, exhaustion and fear overtaking pride. The others followed, the realization dawning that the woman before them was unstoppable, not just because of her skill, but because of the years of endurance and survival that had forged her into something beyond comprehension. Alina stepped back, breathing controlled, body tense but steady. "Leave," she said softly. "Go, survive, and remember I will be ready next time." The operatives withdrew into the shadows, retreating silently, calculating, defeated but alive. Harker exhaled, a mix of relief and awe washing over him. He looked at Alina, noticing the faint tremor in her hands, the exhaustion hidden beneath her calm exterior. "You did it," he said quietly. "You saved everyone." Alina nodded but didn't smile. "Tonight was survival," she said. "Tomorrow we rebuild, we prepare because they'll be back, and next time it won't just be a test." Harker studied her, realizing the full truth. Alina Ward was more than a warrior. She was a living testament to endurance, to the human spirit transformed into lethal precision. Her scars, her history, her survival, they weren't weaknesses. They were weapons, maps of resilience, proof that no one could erase her. As dawn broke over Coronado, casting pale light over the sand and steel, Harker knew the battle wasn't over, not truly. But for the first time in his long career, he felt the rare, deep certainty that survival could be absolute, and that some ghosts, when tempered by endurance and resolve, could not be defeated. Alina Ward flexed her hands, scarred ribs flexing with strength and memory. She whispered to herself, almost a vow, "I survived before, and I will survive again." The operatives had been repelled. The base was safe, for now. But the shadows of the past had been cast long, and Coronado would never forget the night when Alina Ward turned her scars into weapons and her history into power. Harker knew one truth above all. She was more than a soldier. She was the embodiment of survival, precision, and the human spirit's unyielding resilience. And as long as she stood, no one, living or ghost, could erase her. The sun rose over the horizon, illuminating scars, sweat, and determination. And somewhere in the distant shadows, the former operatives regrouped, knowing that the next battle with Alina Ward would be their last chance, or their end. Coronado had survived the night, but Alina Ward had survived far more. And as she gazed toward the horizon, Harker realized it wasn't just the base that had been tested. It was the limits of human endurance, resolve, and the indomitable will of one woman who refused to be erased.